This question over with all you're doing is ensure it goes on forever. Quick question.
Welcome to British Focus, the place where we cut through the noise and reveal the truths that the mainstream media choose to ignore. Today, we expose Keir Starmer's hypocrisy, a man who portrays himself as the champion of the NHS, yet whose arguments fall apart under the slightest scrutiny. Starmer and his supporters would have you believe that he stands for the working class, for public services, and for the people. But what's the reality? His words are nothing but empty rhetoric, a smokescreen to distract from hard facts. Under his leadership, the NHS remains in turmoil, with soaring waiting lists, staff shortages, and shocking inefficiencies. Yet, instead of offering genuine solutions, Starmer resorts to panic, dodging tough questions, and repeating meaningless slogans. Why does he refuse to engage in an open debate? Why does he instantly resort to fear tactics whenever his failing policies are questioned? The answer is obvious. He has no real plan, no vision, and no alternative. All he offers is more bureaucracy, more delays, and more empty promises. Don't forget to like and subscribe to British Focus as we continue to expose the establishment's lies. Now, let's get into the video.
The honourable member for Clacton says that his party is, and I quote, open to anything when it comes to changing our NHS and open to an insurance-based system.
If I can assure the honourable member for Rugby that Reform want healthcare to be free at the point of delivery. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. There appears to be some panic on that side of the House. I'm not surprised. To ask the Prime Minister, I'd like some advice, please. What do I say? Oh, they really are panicking, aren't they?
Order. I want to get this question over with. All you're doing is ensure it goes on forever. Quick question.
To ask the Prime Minister for some advice, what do I say to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including... What do I say, Prime Minister, to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including 99-year-old Jim O'Dwyer, who flew a full set of missions on Lancaster bombers as tail end Charlie, as they're losing their winter fuel allowance, feeling the pinch, whilst at the same time we're prepared to give away a military base and pay £18 billion for the privilege of doing so.
Mr. Speaker, he talks of panic. The only panic is people using the NHS who know that under his policy he wants to charge them for using the NHS. And what he should say to the people of Clacton when he finally finds Clacton is that they should vote Labour because we're stabilising the economy and boosting the Dems.
Keir Starmer, a man who bends and evades at the mere mention of hard truths, claims to be a leader who stands for the people. Yet, every time real issues come to the forefront, he panics. What exactly is he afraid of? Why do he and his Labour allies spiral into hysteria whenever someone dares to challenge the failing status quo? Take John Slinger's intervention in the House of Commons, where he brought up Reform's stance on the NHS. They proposed a discussion, yes, simply a discussion, on how to improve efficiency and sustainability while keeping it free at the point of use. How did Starmer respond? Not with engagement, not with debate, not even with facts or logic. Instead, he reacted with panic, dismissal, and cheap political attacks. This is the Labour Party under Starmer, terrified of open dialogue, unwilling to acknowledge their failures, and utterly devoid of fresh ideas. Now, let's talk about Nigel Farage's challenge. He pointed out that 25,000 people in Clacton, including a 99-year-old veteran who fought for this country, are losing their winter fuel allowance, struggling to survive. Meanwhile, this so-called responsible government is giving away a military base and spending £18 billion for the privilege. And what did Starmer do? Did he offer an explanation? Did he show any accountability? Of course not. He dodged the question, ignored the issue, and smugly suggested that voting Labour would somehow fix everything. Starmer's grand solution? Vote Labour because we are stabilising the economy and increasing GDP. What economy is he talking about? The one drowning in debt under his leadership? The one where working people are being squeezed by endless tax hikes while public services continue to deteriorate? The one where small businesses are suffocating under Labour's crushing regulations while large corporations benefit from loopholes? And as for GDP growth, what increase? The only thing rising under Starmer's Labour is the cost of living crisis, the tax burden on ordinary Britons, and the ever-growing NHS waiting lists. People are tired of hearing abstract economic figures while their reality is skyrocketing bills, unaffordable housing, and a crumbling healthcare system. This is the Starmer strategy: distract, deflect, and demonize anyone who dares to question him. But let's get to the real issue, his actual plan for the NHS. Because make no mistake, Keir Starmer is no savior of the NHS, no matter how hard he tries to sell that narrative. He loves to accuse Reform and others of wanting to privatise healthcare. But what has he actually done? Under Starmer, the NHS is in complete crisis. Record-breaking waiting lists. Severe staff shortages. Hospitals overwhelmed with demand. Unprecedented levels of bureaucratic waste. And what's his solution? Throwing more taxpayer money into a system bleeding resources without addressing its inefficiencies. He refuses to even discuss reforms while offering no viable alternative. And let's not forget his past. When he was part of Corbyn's Labour, did he fight to improve the NHS? Did he push for real change? Of course not. He stood by and did nothing while the system continued to break down. Now, he expects people to believe that he suddenly has all the answers. But here's the real kicker. Is Starmer laying the groundwork for a privatisation deal behind closed doors? He accuses others of wanting to introduce private elements into healthcare, yet his own party has overseen a quiet expansion of private contracts within the NHS. While publicly positioning himself as a champion of public healthcare, Labour has been channeling billions into private companies, ensuring that their donors and allies profit from the system's failure. Meanwhile, as the NHS collapses, the private sector flourishes. More people than ever are forced to go private because they simply can't afford to wait. More private contracts are signed in secrecy, avoiding public scrutiny. More Labour-linked interests are profiting from the chaos they refuse to fix. Keir Starmer isn't saving the NHS, he's allowing it to collapse while pretending to defend it. So why won't he talk about these backdoor deals? Why does he refuse to explain why the NHS is becoming more reliant on private services under his leadership? Why does he attack those calling for reform, while standing by as the very system he claims to protect is handed over to private entities in secret? Because Starmer has no real plan. He has no backbone, no vision, and no answers. His entire political strategy is based on branding his opponents as dangerous while offering nothing of substance himself. Strip away the PR spin, and what are we left with? A weak leader who crumbles under pressure, dodges difficult questions, and relies on fear tactics instead of real solutions. If he truly cared about the NHS, he would be honest about its current state. He would engage in discussions about meaningful reform. He would offer clear policies instead of rehearsed soundbites and empty promises. But he doesn't, because he is part of the problem. This is the real Keir Starmer, a coward when it comes to real debate, a hypocrite on NHS reform, and a politician more focused on optics than real change. And that's something every voter should remember. Keir Starmer portrays himself as the savior of the NHS, the man who will rescue it from decades of mismanagement and financial neglect. But when we look past the surface, the reality is starkly different. He claims to be stabilizing the economy, yet in practice, this means higher taxes, expanding bureaucracy, and an endless cycle of failure. While ordinary Britons watch the NHS collapse, Starmer and his inner circle position themselves to benefit. Let's be absolutely clear. Starmer's goal is not to fix the NHS, it's to let it deteriorate just enough to justify an increased reliance on private providers. And that is exactly what's happening. Record-breaking waiting lists, overwhelmed hospitals, mass staff departures, and a healthcare system failing millions. This is the reality under Starmer's watch. And what is the inevitable consequence? More people being pushed towards private healthcare, not by choice, but because they cannot afford to wait for treatment. Yet, despite all of this, Starmer has the audacity to attack those who challenge the system. Instead of debating real solutions, he brands reform and other critics as extremists, accusing them of seeking to dismantle the NHS. But what does he conveniently ignore? That under his leadership, the NHS is already being quietly handed over to private interests. While Starmer publicly denounces privatisation, contracts continue to flow into the private sector. Waiting lists keep growing, and the money that should be strengthening the NHS is instead being redirected into private deals that benefit a select few. The system is being intentionally weakened, making private alternatives not just an option, but a necessity for those who can afford it. And here's where the hypocrisy becomes undeniable. Starmer rages about how reform's policies would destroy the NHS, yet Labour itself is ensuring that fewer and fewer people can access free healthcare in a timely manner. Their strategy is clear: manufacture a crisis, refuse to fix it, and then insist that the only solution is more of the same failed policies. Does anyone truly believe that Starmer is clueless about this? Of course not. He knows exactly what's happening. He simply doesn't want to discuss it. Instead, he hides behind empty rhetoric, claiming Labour is protecting the NHS. But what exactly is he protecting? Because it certainly isn't patient care. It's not efficiency. It's not accessibility. Labour is protecting the illusion of the NHS, pretending it's functioning while quietly funneling billions into private hands. This is why Starmer will never allow an honest debate on NHS reform. He cannot defend his record. He cannot explain why billions of taxpayer money are disappearing into secretive private contracts while patients suffer on waiting lists. He cannot justify why Labour supports the very system they claim to oppose. So, what's his response? Deflect, distract, and deceive. And here's the biggest question. If Starmer truly believed in his vision for the NHS, why does he fear scrutiny so much? If Labour really had a superior plan, wouldn't they welcome a debate? Wouldn't they seize the chance to prove their policies are working? But they don't, because they know they are failing. They know the NHS is breaking down under their leadership. They know public trust is vanishing. Their only strategy is to silence debate and attack their critics. The reality is undeniable. Starmer's NHS is a broken NHS. A system choked by bureaucracy, drowning in inefficiencies, and deteriorating year after year. And while ordinary Britons struggle to get treatment, those at the top make sure they never have to wait in line. So the next time Starmer stands up and claims to be protecting the NHS, ask yourself, who is he really protecting? Because it certainly isn't you. Make no mistake, if we don't challenge this now, if we don't demand transparency, accountability, and real reform, the NHS as we know it will disappear. It's time to wake up. Time to hold these politicians accountable. And most of all, time to stop falling for their lies. If you agree, share this video, because the establishment doesn't want the truth getting out. Let's make sure they hear it anyway.